Chapter 22, Psychomyth number 9.
Sometimes you think you have something in the bag, but the bag breaks. Ernie Banks.
Sooner or later, a person standing at a whiteboard is going to tell you that there are 3 kinds of people: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. This person will inform you that visual people are easily identified because they say things like, "I see what you mean. I can picture that. I view it the same way." Then you'll be told that you can recognize auditory people through their use of such phrases as, "I hear what you're trying to tell me. Sounds good to me. Listen to what I'm saying." Last, you'll be taught that kinesthetic people are those who use phrases like, "I grasp what you're saying. I feel what you're saying is wrong. I am touched that you care." Although this tidy little theory is taught from coast to coast, you'll not find a molecule of scientific evidence to support it. In fact, the whole concept is utterly incongruent with all that is currently known about the architecture and functions of the human brain. Consequently, it came as no surprise to me when the opening line of the first booklet I was able to find on the subject said, quote, "This booklet is written using the old adage, 'Keep it simple, stupid,' because you are too busy to read through a lot of psychological babble." In other words, my opinion was, quote, "This is a groundless theory based on zero medical research." A serious investigation of the preferences labeled visual, auditory, and kinesthetic reveals the entire VAK theory to be little more than the unfortunate mislabeling of preferences long known to exist among persons who are left brain or right brain dominant. Those persons labeled visual do have a preference, but it's not so much for eyesight as for empirical certainty, a common attribute of those who are left brain dominant. Likewise, persons with a preference toward right brain instincts and intuition, as opposed to left brain facts, are easily mislabeled auditory, since the world of right brain intuition is that place where colorful auditory words can blaze into an epiphany of intuitive understanding. Left brain versus right brain dominance is a real phenomenon, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with sight versus sound. The mislabeling of kinesthetic people is even further off the mark, since those who enjoy tactile sensations, the sensing preference in Myers-Briggs terminology, are not necessarily the same ones who will use affective terms. "I feel what you're saying is wrong. I am touched that you care." Such phrases as these are more likely to indicate an emotional feeling preference, as opposed to any tactile feeling preference that might possibly be labeled kinesthetic. Can one's choice of words give us insight into that person? Absolutely so. Does one's choice of words indicate how that person gathers, processes, stores, and relates data differently than the brains of other humans? Absolutely, positively not. The visual, auditory, kinesthetic theory sprang into existence because lazy people demanded quick and simple bullets, nuggets, rules, steps, and systems rather than investing the time and energy required to gain real understanding.
While intelligent people can often simplify the complex, a fool is more likely to complicate the simple. Gerald W. Grummett. Chapter 23. Same whiteboard, same trainer.
Rooms full of bright-eyed students from coast to coast are being taught that, quote, 93% of all verbal communication is nonverbal. 93%. Tragically, these students often believe this absurdity and use it as an excuse for not learning how to become more compelling speakers and writers. I wouldn't be quite so bothered if the whole 93% nonverbal myth were just a cleverly constructed fraud. But it's actually worse than that. These sales trainers actually believe this stuff, though few of them can tell you why other than to say, "It's what I was taught." Those who can explain will tell you that, quote, 55% of all communication is through body language, and 38% is through voice tonality, and only 7% is verbal. Just add 55% to 38%, and voila, you have 93%, quote, nonverbal. The whole 55-38-7 myth began when somebody horribly misapplied an obscure comment from Silent Messages, a 1971 book by Dr. Albert Mehrabian. By the way, the credit for this extraordinary detective work goes to Dr. C.E. Johnson, who provides the following details. From Chapter 3 of Silent Messages, we find that the numbers 7, 38, 55, expressed as percentages, have to do only with what Dr. Mehrabian calls the resolution of inconsistent messages. He also states that there are very few things that can be communicated non-verbally. When I spoke with him by phone in March 1994, he stated that his findings and inferences were not meant to be applied to normal communications. They were of very limited application. Following his conversation with Dr. Mehrabian, Dr. Johnson wrote, "Some people have made some rather sweeping and inaccurate generalizations. If we continue to disseminate erroneous information such as the 73855 myth, I feel we are doing a grave disservice. We could do a great service by helping the public realize that the words they use are extremely important." The simple truth is that words are the most powerful force there has ever been. I know it to be true. Every cognitive neuroscientist in the world knows it to be true, and now I hope you know it too.
There are lies. Damn lies and statistics. Mark Twain.
Chapter 24. Did your valedictorian get rich?
Everything was entirely memorized, yet nothing had been translated into meaningful words. The students were all sitting there, taking dictation, and when the professor repeated the sentence, they checked it to make sure they wrote it down all right. Then they wrote the next sentence, and on and on. So you see, they could pass the examinations and learn all this stuff and not know anything at all, except what they had memorized. Nobel laureate Professor Richard Feynman, explaining the problems of left-brain-only education.
The old assumptions that intelligence and creativity are largely innate, that learning is strictly logical, objective, and linear, and dependent on class time and the technology of pen, paper, and textbooks. These old assumptions are wrong. It is true that academic success involves largely solitary study, generally uninterrupted work, concentration on a single subject, and much writing. But commercial success, which depends equally on intelligence, involves understanding in many different disciplines, working with others, not alone, constant distractions, and mainly verbal skills. Employers are already saying that a degree is not enough, and that many graduates do not have the qualities they are looking for: the ability to communicate, work in teams, adapt to change, to innovate, and be creative. This is not surprising. The traditional academic curriculum is not designed to promote creativity. Complaining that the system does not produce creative people is like complaining that a car doesn't fly. It was never intended to. The stark message is that the answer to the future is not simply to increase the amount of education, but to educate people differently. This from Professor Ken Robinson of the 21st Century Learning Initiative, a group of neuroscientists, psychologists, and educators committed to educational reform. According to Dr. Albert Shanker, president of the American Federation of Teachers in 1999, quote, "The factory was the inspiration for our current educational model. But America's old-fashioned factories are dead or dying, and the limitations of America's traditional factory model of education have become manifest, and they are crippling. Get rid of that damn machine model. It's wrong. The brain is a biological system, not a machine. We are currently putting children with biologically shaped brains into machine-orientated schools. The two just don't mix. We bog the school down in a curriculum that is not biologically feasible." Professor Robert Sylvester. It is, in fact, nothing short of a miracle that the modern methods of instruction have not yet entirely strangled the holy curiosity of inquiry. For this delicate little plant, aside from stimulation, stands mainly in need of freedom. Without this, it goes to rack and ruin without fail. It is a very grave mistake to think that the engagement of seeing and searching can be promoted by means of coercion and a sense of duty. Albert Einstein. What these people are saying, in a nutshell, is that America's system of education was built with a strong cultural bias toward the left hemisphere of the brain, the part that provides us with linear, sequential logic. Now, neurologists are discovering that the right hemisphere, the intuitive, artsy half of the brain, is perhaps even more important to your success than the logical left side. So there you go.
I always kind of resented being educated. It takes away from the self you brought to college. Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Updike, 69, speaking to students at Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Mediocre men often have the most acquired knowledge. Claude Bernard. Chapter 25. But to be fair.
In this book, I have chosen to affirm the right brain perspective only because right brain contributions are so often minimalized in a society that is dominated by left brain types. This is certainly not to imply that the left brain realistic perspective is not valuable. The real truth is that it takes both left brain and right brain insights, as the following story will illustrate. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip. After a good meal and a bottle of wine, they lay down for the night and went to sleep. Some hours later, Holmes awoke and nudged his faithful friend. "Watson, look up and tell me what you see." Watson replied, "I see millions and millions of stars." "What does that tell you?" asked left-brained Holmes. Right-brained Watson pondered for a moment and then said, "Astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Horologically, I deduce that the time is approximately 3:15. Theologically, I can see that the universe is magnificent, and that we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, I suspect that we will have a beautiful day tomorrow. What does it tell you?" Holmes was silent for a moment, then spoke. "Watson, you idiot! Someone has stolen our tent."
Romanticism and science are good for each other. The scientist keeps the romantic honest, and the romantic keeps the scientist human. Tom Robbins.